Okay, thank you everyone for joining tonight. This is our third presentation in this context of introducing university majors. And our guest speaker is Dr. Erin Vernon, who is a professor of economics at Seattle University. I'm very thankful for Erin to join us tonight. As some of you know, I'm Roshana Roshandel. I'm part of Alefba and a member of Alefba. I'm also, in my previous life, I was a professor at Seattle University. So Erin and I worked together at that time. And also we have kids who went to the same school. So we were parents in the same school community as well. So lots of connection there. So I'm super grateful for Erin to join us tonight. I want to give a very quick, brief introduction about Erin and her background. She teaches a variety of courses in the undergraduate and graduate programs at Seattle University in the MBA program and the professional MBA program and the undergraduate business programs. Her area of research and specialization is in health economics. She has done a lot of interesting work on the intersection of economics and healthcare, the US medical system, childhood nutrition, racial and ethnic disparities within healthcare, and economics of genetic screening. So as you can see, the area is fascinating and very interdisciplinary as well, with applications in the healthcare area in this case. Dr. Vernon received her PhD from University of Washington, and she also has an undergraduate degree in finance and computer applications from University of Notre Dame. She was a former student athlete. For those of you high school students who are also student athletes and interested in that's an angle that we haven't had before. She also has experience working before becoming a professor, I think, working as an analyst at the Federal Reserve Board in Washington, D.C. So interesting kind of multifaceted background that comes in. So we are super excited to have her here, and without further ado, I'm just going to go and turn my video off and let Dr. Vernon start her presentation. Just one more thing, if you have any questions, we are going to have some time at the end for Q&A, but if you have questions, you can also put them in chat, and we'll come to it either during the session or most likely at the end. Thank you.
Great, thank you. So the first question is the usual question that you're all used to. Can you guys see the PowerPoint? Does that look good? Yes? Okay. Yes, okay, great. Yeah, so thank you. So as mentioned, I am not a career academic. I worked at the Federal Reserve in Washington, D.C., and also as an economics consultant for quite a few years. But for the past half decade, I have been full-time academic working at Seattle University and researching mainly in health economics. So today I'm just going to talk a little bit about economics and what topics you'd expect to see if you choose this major, what you would be studying. Don't worry, it's not too much of a lecture, but just kind of the key terminologies that you would expect to see there. And then where economics plays a contribution, because it is, as mentioned, very interdisciplinary. It is essential to business, but also used quite a bit outside of business. And then I was thinking about what would be valuable for this particular group. And I think just learning about what recent economics majors are currently doing right now, I think can be helpful. So I have some quotes from some recent majors that I've taught at Seattle University of what they're currently doing, and they're anywhere from 1 year to 5 years out. And so you can just kind of visualize a little bit more specifically what you can do with an econ major right out of undergrad. Okay, so I'm going to start. This is a picture of my building at Seattle University, and right off the dots, we can see that economics is a little more special than all the other majors in the Albers School of Business and Economics. We get called out. And why we get called out, where the other majors, accounting, marketing, management, do not, is, as I mentioned, economics is very useful in business, and it's a great degree if you want to go into business, but it's also very useful outside of business, in particular looking at policies. So it's a broader context. In fact, a lot of colleges don't have economics housed in the business school. They actually have it housed in the College of Arts and Sciences. So it's a very interdisciplinary discipline that spans not only business, but a lot of other majors. So what is economics? In the most simplest term, it's a social science that studies how we in society allocate scarce resources. So just that short sentence, there's quite a few things to unpack. First, I want to highlight it's a science. So like the physical sciences, we have hypotheses, and then through statistics and numbers, we either support that hypothesis or find that it's not supported and very likely untrue. And so it is an objective methodology at its heart of researching things. And I'll get to what the things are throughout the next half hour. Where it becomes messier than the physical sciences is that social word. It's a social science. So we're looking at human behavior. And why that's messier than the physical sciences is, for example, take chemistry and you add water to a solution and you predict what the outcome will be. You can hold everything else constant in a lab. In economics, you'll see we analyze a lot of the impact of policy or changes in regulation. You can't tell people in businesses, okay, don't change anything else for the next month because we want to see how this particular policy has impacted you. You can't really do that. So it gets a little messier and the statistics get a little bit harder because we're studying human behavior, but at its heart, it is an objective science. Looking at how society allocates scarce resources. So basically, in other words, we can't do it all. As humans, as businesses, and as countries, we can't meet the wants of every single person. And so economics basically takes the concept of scarcity, that we can't do it all, starts with that and says, why do we choose to do what we do, given we know we can't do it all? As individuals, as businesses, as organizations, as countries. Starting with this concept of limited resources, why do we make the decisions we do? And at the heart, that is what economics is. If any of you have looked at a course catalog at any university, the courses are almost always split out into micro and macroeconomics. And you can see scarcity is still there, but microeconomics looks more at personal choices in light of scarcity. Almost all of us are limited by finances. We can't buy it all and do it all. We're limited by our finances, but even the most wealthy of us are limited by time. And so we all have scarcity. Why do we choose to do what we do? A lot of students leave my micro classes surprised how much psychology is part of microeconomics. Microeconomics also looks at the theory of the firm and companies, because companies cannot produce an unlimited amount of goods and services. So where do they stop producing? What's that point where they're most beneficial in terms of production levels? And also hiring levels. And I'll talk about this a little bit more, but you can't hire an unlimited amount of people. So what's the right mix in terms of hiring? So economics that looks at individual choice and firm or company choices is known as microeconomics. The big picture of countries, knowing they're not going to meet the wants of every single individual, how do they set up their policies, their laws and regulations? Those are bigger picture things that fall under macroeconomics. You might have heard economics is sometimes called the dismal science because it starts with this, either macro or micro, it starts with this concept of scarcity. We're not going to be able to do it all. But how can we maximize the benefits of our citizens in a country, knowing we're not going to make everyone happy? And so those are big picture, the two sub-definitions of economics that people study. For the next few slides, I'm going to take key concepts from microeconomics and then from macroeconomics that you would learn within those courses. Starting with microeconomics, I would say the one concept most students, there's a major poof factor in any course, as you guys know in high school, like what you learn in that class, after a year. Usually in a micro course, what stays with them is this concept of opportunity cost. And this is a key part of economic research, is looking at when you make a decision, not just the money that changes hand at that particular moment, but looking big picture of all the costs that go into making a decision. Maybe it's money in the future, or maybe it's indirect costs of a big loss of time, even though it might be a cheap activity. And so when people make decisions and businesses, we should be looking at all costs, including opportunity costs that might not have a dollar figure show up on your checking balance. I'm going to give a couple examples of this opportunity cost concept. So what's the opportunity cost of going to college? Well, it's pretty easy to point to the dollar figure, which is growing every year, and say this is the cost of tuition, room, and board. But that's not the only cost when you're thinking about, should I go to college? The other costs, which might be bigger for some people, involve the fact that you can't really have a full-time job and succeed in getting your bachelor's, most likely. So you're giving up 4 years of income. For a lot of people, that's even greater than the actual cost of tuition. And that's a big decision maker. On top of that, if you are going away to college and maybe have an ailing loved one, that's a huge opportunity cost of time away from loved ones, especially if they're not well. And those might be bigger drivers than that tuition number that you see. And so when you're making a decision in economics, you want to look at the holistic, all the costs that are important to making that decision. So the parents aren't panicking. I thought I'd go over what's the opportunity cost of not pursuing a college degree. And I'll send these slides later so you have the resources, but there's a very recent Georgetown University research that looked at the lifetime earnings of a college degree on average compared to just a high school degree. And over a lifetime, your earnings are about 1.2 million more on average by pursuing a college degree. And that obviously varies. You learned about a computer science major. That's about 2 million more on average, as well as engineering majors. And then there's a few majors where it's slightly less, but still still over 500,000 more than a high school degree. So there is, if you're interested in that study, I will show that to you. So there is, if you look at it, it's a huge upfront cost. But if you choose not to go to college, you are losing out on the potential for much more significant lifetime future earnings. In addition, there is research that shows career fulfillment is higher. Essentially, you have more choices to pursue paths that might lead to more personal fulfillment the more education you receive. So that's another opportunity cost you would miss out on by not choosing the bachelor degree path. Another example of opportunity costs is quite hokey, but you'd actually probably, especially in the short term, save money if you have a cheeseburger every day. But there is a big opportunity cost to that, and that's obviously your health. And so when you're thinking about making a decision, the hope is that you're thinking bigger picture than what's transactional. One question that is in a lot of the Econ 101 microtext is asking, why do US citizens buy significantly larger cars than other countries? And quite often in a class, I have students be like, US people like things bigger. And that's not actually wrong, but it's really not getting at the underlying reason of why people in the United States behave differently than people in the other countries. Why do we like bigger cars? we buy significantly more. And what we found in doing research in terms of behavioral economics is when you see groups of people behaving differently, whether across countries or behave differently across time, there's almost always an underlying opportunity cost that's very different across groups. So the question here is, what's the opportunity cost of buying a bigger car? That's the same in all countries, and that is they use more gas. So why are other people choosing to buy more fuel-efficient cars? Is it because they care more about the environment? Is that really the reason? And to show the answer is the basic reason is that opportunity cost of using more fuel is way cheaper in the United States. There might be people in France and Italy that really want that bigger car or truck, but they truly cannot afford it because the price of gas is 3 times as much. So that opportunity cost that comes with owning a more fuel-efficient car or owning a less fuel-efficient car is not as high in the United States. And so that explains that behavioral difference. And so we use opportunity costs to really push, why has behavior changed across time in different situations? And as mentioned, we've looked at this. I do quite a bit of research on the obesity epidemic and saying what's changed across time in the past 2 decades that's made it significantly harder as citizens in the United States, pretty much across most countries, but in the United States especially, to maintain a healthy weight. What has changed in our society? So those are kind of economic questions. And then the final one is Obama was quite famous for saying this all the time, there's no such thing as a free lunch. This is tied directly to opportunity cost concept. So remember, this is the dismal science, but nothing is essentially free. You might be getting the free lunch, but you're giving up that time. And so in economics, we have a holistic look at costs, and that's what's known as opportunity costs. And that's a lot of what you would study in a microeconomics class. I'm not going to go into a lot of detail on what you would study in macro, other than just point out kind of the three of the more main areas in macroeconomics. Is as a country level, are there things we can do to improve our unemployment levels? So unemployment is people who are actively looking for work but cannot find it. And that is dangerous if we have high levels of unemployment. That essentially means people who need to maintain rent and feed their families are unable to find jobs. And this is very detrimental, obviously, to society. And so a macroeconomic research would be looking into policies to promote better employment levels. Something that's hitting the news right now, which hasn't for over a decade, is inflation, or the price of all goods and services are starting to rise. And what can we do about that? Or should we do anything about it? That's a macroeconomic question that we would build models and analyze. Similarly, US debt levels. That's a whole topic that we would tackle. Is it okay that we have pretty high levels of US debt right now? Or should we be starting to take steps to bring our debt levels down? So those are the more macro, big picture, country level questions you would get in a macroeconomics course. Okay, so the next few slides are big picture, and I know I'm missing some, but I'm giving you a sample of where economists play roles in our society. First is, if you want to be a macroeconomist, this is exactly tied to the last slide. You would look at these policies, and just as a sneak preview, if you haven't taken a macro class, policies that bring down inflation actually make unemployment worse, and vice versa. You can't improve both at the same time easily. So macroeconomists are the ones that are saying, are our inflation levels bad enough where we want to risk higher unemployment? Those are things that macroeconomists do. And again, they look at, debt levels. As I mentioned, economics is essential to business. If you choose to major in any business major, you will have to take at least 2, probably 4 economics courses. It's a key part of the business curriculum at almost any school. And some examples of where economists get hired is to figure out pricing levels. There's trade-offs, there's opportunity costs. So if you raise prices, it's great for, as a business, for the people who still buy your good, they're paying more. But obviously, as you raise prices, fewer and fewer people buy your good. So what's that sweet spot where people are still buying your good, but your price is as high as it could be? An economic model would tell you what that sweet spot would be, or help inform you of where that price point is where you can make the most profit of that particular good. There's a lot of models in terms of labor and hiring people or buying equipment. There's this term that's known as the law of diminishing marginal returns. And I touched on it earlier. It's also known as too much of a good thing. At some point, hiring more workers causes more harm than good. A lot of you guys are in high school, so think about a football team. They hire one coach, they're probably going to be better than if they were coachless. Hire two coaches, one can work on defense. Hire three coaches, one can work on offense. Well, there's an overall head coach, and then you can get a quarterback coach. But by the time you hire the 40th coach, that's going to be more confusing than helpful. So at some point in hiring processes, hiring more people, even if it's the best people in the world, is not going to improve your situation, whatever it is. And so again, that's an economic, using economic concepts and models can help you kind of figure out where that ideal point is. A lot of forecasting, dealing with data, understanding the relationship between your company and policies and what other companies are doing. That's a lot of where economists get hired, is forecasting. This last bullet here is a question I get from a lot of times early on undergrads, is understanding the difference between an accounting degree, a finance degree, an economics degree, and a data analytics degree, which is becoming a popular major across a lot of universities now. This is very simplified, so for those accountants and finance people out there, I apologize. There's a lot more, but just in a nutshell, simplifying, accounting is a very safe major because accounting practices are very standardized, and it's more a way of cataloging the past of a company and knowing the present situation. So what did we spend on payroll last year? Do we have enough cash in our cash flows to make this payment? It's quantifying what we currently have and what we've done in the past in a very standardized way. People who are type A sometimes really gravitate toward accounting. Of all the majors, it's the most black and white. This is how you do things. And like I said, it can be a very safe and lucrative career for those that enjoy that black and white type of approach. Finance is more using the current situation and making future projections. And so it has more of, okay, what are we worth as a company right now? And part of that involves what are we projecting to earn in profit in the future? And what should we do in the future? So it has more of a forward-looking stance, all else equal, where accounting is more present and past looking. Economics, again, is more holistic than that. I'm going to give a very specific kind of simplified example to show the difference between accounting, finance, and economics. So let's pretend like we're a company and we're thinking about buying a very expensive piece of equipment. The accountants would tell us whether or not we have the money in the bank to buy it. The finance people would say, wait, hold off. Just because we can't afford it doesn't mean we should. Let's look at projections and make sure the revenue that we'll get based off of buying this piece of equipment is better than the costs. Basically, the benefits outweigh the costs. The economists would say, even if the benefits outweigh the costs, let's look at that money we're spending and make sure there's nothing else we could spend that money to that has a greater return, that has even more benefits that outweigh that cost. So let's take that cost and make sure there's nothing else we could be doing. So it's bigger picture. Data analytics is more tied to a company might have a ton of data it collects. It might have the transaction of every person and every price point. It's a lot of data. How do you make that useful? How do you make that into a graph or a bar chart that makes sense, that you can actually make decisions out of? So it's understanding how to handle big data and make it basically readable in an accurate way. In Seattle U, I can only speak for Seattle U, but I know economics and data analytics overlap quite a bit. A lot of economics professors teach the data analytics courses because it overlaps a lot, because in economics, we are looking at a lot of data to answer these questions on pricing, labor allocation, and on policy, which we'll get to in the next slide. So data analytics is making sense of broad swaths of data so you can make decisions off of it. Economics helps you ask the questions to make that data make sense too, as well. Okay, like I said, economics transcends the business world. It's also useful in other areas, specifically policy, environmental policy. There's a lot of economists involved with climate change initiatives. We need to slow down polluting, but some pollution mitigation measures are more costly to society than others. So economists help answer the question of where can we make the biggest climate contributions, reduce pollution, yet at the same time not have it as costly to society? What's the best way to reduce pollution where we're not really making life detrimental to a lot of people? Another area where there's a lot of economists is in fishing policies. And this is because no one owns the ocean. So it suffers from something known as the tragedy of the commons. Is fishermen have this mindset that if I'm not going to get my haul with my fish, someone else is going to come and take it. And it's a short-term mindset where if there was people owning it, they would think about the future. But here, if I'm not taking it, someone else is going to take it. And so we have a lot of endangered species, especially in the ocean. And so there's a lot of international economists setting fishing policies in our oceans. Economists also do a lot of work in the area of inequality and poverty. You've probably heard of proposals. Yang, who ran for the Democratic nomination for president, was a big proponent of individual basic income. And this is something that actually Iceland is doing right now. And that's this concept of giving everyone money, regardless of whether or not they have a job, so they can meet their basic needs. And there are a lot of benefits to that, but it's very costly. So are those benefits worth it? And that's something economists are studying. Microloans have been seen to be very successful, especially in emerging markets. One of my PhD colleagues does a lot of research in this area and done a lot of studies that show giving microloans, in particular to women, have a greater chance of success and bringing those families out of poverty. This is some area where economists are doing a lot of research. Education. Obama funded early childhood education based off of economic research that showed the money put into that more than paid off in terms of productivity of the family and benefits to the kid in terms of higher test scores and achievements in the far-reaching future. Also, I gave the example of the Georgetown study that shows that getting higher education degrees, all else equal at the individual level, is beneficial. It's also beneficial at a community level. More money gets put into the community, the higher percentage of bachelor's degrees in that area. So there is a motivation for public universities to lower their tuition to get more people to be able to get degrees. And then looking at if minimum wage is a way to help with the wage gap that I'll talk about in a second. Minimum wage, all else equal, is a great way to boost the working poor's income levels, but there is a caveat is there's a risk that companies, if minimum wage gets raised too high, may possibly reduce the hours of workers so they're not making as much, or even possibly lay them off. And so it's not a no-brainer to significantly increase minimum wage without having some sort of other mechanisms to make sure employment levels stay the same or hourly work does not go lower. There's a lot of research going into the wage gap that we're seeing in the United States. I'm just going to show a slide on that. Prior to 1980, the dark blue line is basically companies' earnings. And you can see prior to 1980 in the United States, companies' earnings and workers' wages were essentially the same. So when companies' earnings went up, workers' wages went up. And you can see this widening gap that's happening right now that's detrimental. Workers' wages are not benefiting from companies being more successful. It's more going to the company shareholders. And so understanding how that's happened and how to, there's a general understanding that that's not a good thing. And so how to make it go back to where that gap isn't as wide as it is right now. Okay, I had to do this, sorry. I'm a healthcare economist, so there's a lot of areas where economists are helpful. At the hospital or provider level, economists are hired quite a bit. Just for resource allocation, it's uncomfortable to talk about, but hospitals cannot do everything for every single patient that walks in the door, not because they're after a profit, but because of scarcity. They literally don't have the resources to do it all. So how do they choose what equipment to buy? How many doctors and nurses to have on hand? Those are questions that economists help. And when you're looking at it from a healthcare point of view, these are almost always nonprofit hospitals. They're not looking at profit margins. They're saying, how do we allocate our resources to improve the health outcomes of the people who use our services the most? And so the benefit here is not profit, obviously, it's health outcome, population health outcomes. And then at a national level, health economists look at how we allocate funding for public health measures, whether it's clean water or exercise programs across the board. Like, how do we best allocate funding to improve public health? And then I'm sure you've seen the push for Medicare, which is insurance for the 65 plus crowd in the United States. That's automatic. Medicare for all. Why don't we give everyone health insurance? Obviously, that's very costly, and there's a lot of issues to that in terms of whether or not we could afford it. And so that's something that economists look at, the trade-offs. Is it worth it? How can we go about doing that? Okay, so those are kind of the areas where economists contribute. Hopefully, after what I've talked about, you can kind of see why a lot of world leaders, past and current, are actually economics majors. Kamala Harris is actually a political science and economic major as well. We see a lot of people in the nonprofit world that are economics majors as well. Former leader of the UN, the first Supreme Court justice. I think we all know Melinda Gates. James Blake is an activist, former pro tennis player, and Millard Fuller is the founder of Habitat for Humanity. So a lot of change makers have econ degrees. And then obviously economics is very helpful in business. And there's a lot of CEOs, Meg Whitman is one of them. Actually, now she's an ambassador to Kenya, I believe, but she was a powerful CEO. Warren Buffett, big in the finance world. Elon Musk, dual major, physics and econ at Wharton. And then Esther Dyson, Silicon Valley pioneer. So a lot of famous change makers, leaders have an economics background. It's a very versatile background, that allows you to see connections. At Seattle U for the past 5 years, this is where the students who have gone to grad school, where they have gone. Some who really want to be economists and really big into policy, and I'll talk about a few specific people in the next few slides, go on straight to get masters and PhDs in economics. Law schools love econ majors because basically econ majors are taught to objectively look at things. And so it's a very attractive major for law schools. Also, for the same reason, public policy and health programs like our econ majors quite a bit. Again, it's great for business. It allows you to see connections across industries, which is very helpful. So we've had our majors recently go into Masters of Finance, MBAs, and again, there's statistics involved in economics and understanding how to look at data. So we do have majors go on to get masters in data analytics as well. And here's just a few of the companies that have hired directly out of our undergrad econ majors. And then I have, I think, 5 or 6 students. So here's their titles. And this, I think, is a little different than, say, the accounting majors. I think they all have junior accountant as their title. Econ is a little more flexible of a major. You can be hired a little bit more. In some ways, it's harder because you have to get out there and show you're interested in a specific area. You can see the most common term here is analyst, though. As an econ major, you are taught to analyze things. And so it should come as no surprise that of our undergrads who got hired at the companies that I showed in the previous slide, these were some of their titles. Okay, and then here I just have some quotes from some recent economists, and I'll just talk about, economics majors, and I'll talk about what they're doing as well. So Pearl Lee went into the business side, and she felt like when she was interviewing, her ability to roll up her sleeves and get into data sets and explaining them made her rise above a lot of the candidates for the business positions that she's successfully applied to. Policy as well. This student went on to get a master's at Johns Hopkins, and now he does research on different malaria mitigation strategies for different areas in Africa. And he has mentioned that in the policy side, econ, having a knowledge of the economic statistical methods is in great demand. They really want economists in programs that analyze policy. And he, through his position at Johns Hopkins, and he's about 5 years out of his undergraduate degree, they work with the World Bank to look at what malaria policies should be implemented. Kelsey is a PhD student that is researching racial discrimination in housing markets. And he feels like the undergraduate econ degree he got really helped him right away be able to ask the questions and advance him in his degree. Arden is a graduate last year. He is working at a clean energy company in Hawaii. And he kind of touches on 2 things that I've talked about. One on the professional side, in the top sentence, or top section, is he talks about, I asked him to send a sentence and he got excited. And so I got excited. So there's a lot of words here. But essentially, he feels like he's able to connect the things he's doing in his work to the larger scope of the industry. So that holistic connection that he's able to see in his work, he feels he's benefited from an economics training to allow him to do that. And then on a personal side, I've had students talk about this quite a bit. It's just so they feel like they can be more of an involved community member because they can see more evidence-based and understand how to look at things from all sides. And so he says with his background in economics, he feels he's better equipped to be an involved global citizen moving forward. And I wanted to build off of that by a recent graduate who works at Zillow, who essentially echoes this. So she felt like the econ degree not only prepared her for a job, but to look at real world problems like homelessness, housing insecurity, and looking at resources for underserved communities. So it is very helpful in business, but we also, in the economics major, look at it from policy and helping, you know, the most vulnerable around us in the ways to most effectively do that. And then ending with Cole, who graduated a couple of years ago. His current position is essentially what I talked about health economists do. He helps resource allocation and processes in the emergency rooms run by UW Medicine. And he was really unsure, super smart guy, really unsure what to major in. Ended up landing on economics because it was flexible yet quantitative. And you can see from his quote that he was super happy with this decision. Oops, I lied, one more. So this is a student that got hired right out of undergrad to a Washington, DC think tank. And she said in her interview process for this highly competitive position, they gave her a data set and asked her to analyze it. And she said she was one of the few that were able to successfully analyze it and explain it. They said that they had a lot of people who were quantitatively able to, you know, run the numbers, but weren't able to explain it. And there are other people who could explain it in the big picture, but weren't quite sure how to interpret the numbers. And economics is that balance where you learn to do a little bit of both. And so she's very happy with her econ major. She does health policy research for Brookings Institute. Okay, so that is all I have. I'm gonna unshare my screen in a second, and I'm open to any questions you might have. I also have the website for Seattle U's econ major if that interests you. And then please write down my email if you have any questions, big or small. This is a fun part of being a professor, is working with students who are thinking about their futures. So please don't hesitate to email me now or down the line if you have any questions related to anything I've talked about. Okay, that is all I have.
Thank you very much. This was very informative. I would have liked to become an econ major as an undergrad. Maybe I should go back to college. I just want to make sure for the students who are here, if anybody has any questions, you can use your voice to ask a question. You can turn on your video if you feel like it, or you can just type your questions. Just want to give you a couple minutes to think about any questions you might have. I have two questions for you, and I based on the prior conversation I've had with some students. How important is for students to come in knowing that they want to become an econ major or a business major for that matter? Like, can they just have interest in business and kind of figure that out as they go? I think one thing that students struggle a lot with is they have ideas about what they like, but then when they come in, you know, some majors are more flexible than others. And like, what do you recommend during the first or second semesters or quarters to help them figure out how to explore different majors, and when do they have to really make that decision?
Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, I can answer from Seattle University. I think it's hard because I think some of the bigger universities, it's actually harder to change majors if you come in under, or at least schools. But at least at liberal arts universities and colleges, come with an open mind. Very few students go in knowing what they want, and that's absolutely okay. Like I said, that line of students, I think every single one of them changed their major pretty late on. Kate Hannock, who is at Brookings, which is a very, very well-known think tank, she came in wanting to do environmental environmental major. I'm not even sure what the formal term was. I don't think I know of a student that I've worked with, and I've worked with a ton of students that came in knowing they wanted to be an econ major. So just be willing to have an open mind. Because I think a lot of students that come in thinking they like something learn they don't, and that's okay. That's what college is for.
Great. Any questions from the audience? And I can stop the recording if that helps. Let me stop the recording.
I can ask a question.
Thanks.
Thank you so much, Professor Vernon. It was very useful. So you mentioned that all the companies